Now let's move on to events in Switzerland right now, because US and Iranian officials have begun talks. This is 5 days into a 60-day ceasefire agreement. It's seen elements of the pact already unravel in the past 48 hours. Tehran claiming it's closed the Strait of Hormuz due to conflict continuing in Lebanon. The US Vice President J.D. Vance said today's talks will centre on ending Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions and ending the fighting in Lebanon. He said he'd be there for 2 days, he thought. The Iranian regime says the nuclear issue hasn't been discussed. That's according to Reuters in the past few minutes. We're going to get the details on exactly what's going on, what's being briefed on very shortly on those talks. But first, let's get a clearer sense as we can what might be happening here in the Strait. There are estimated 600 or so ships and tankers still in the waterway, according to various estimates. But up until Iran declared a do not approach warning, dozens of ships were leaving each day, according to CENTCOM, the US military operation control for the Middle East. Let's listen to J.D. Vance.
This is a historic meeting. Never before, outside of Islamabad and here, so outside the last few months, never before has the Iranian and American leadership met at such a high level. What the president has asked us to do is turn over a new leaf, to transform our relationship with the people of Iran and to extend an outstretched hand that says to the people of Iran that if your leadership is willing to give up being a driver of regional instability, if they are willing to give up nuclear weapons ambitions for the long term, then the United States is willing to fundamentally transform our relationship with that country.
Bryan Clark is one of the leading voices on naval warfare, retired US Navy officer and submariner for 2.5 decades. And Bryan served as chief engineer on nuclear submarines and on the chief of naval operations staff as well. He's senior fellow and director of the Centre of Defence Concepts and Technology at the Hudson Institute. Good evening to you, Bryan. Great to have you back on France 24.
Thanks, Gavin. Great to see you.
Tell me your reading at the moment of the state of the Strait.
Well, it looks like we had some progress yesterday. We had a few dozen ships get out the last couple of days, but it seems like that's now slowed to a trickle again as Iran has threatened to close the strait or threatened to attack ships that might make the transit. So now we're back down to the maybe dozen or so a day that are going through along the Omani coast. So we had a brief respite where we got 50 or 60 ships out a day. Now we're back down to about a dozen a day.
So the conflicting messages we had, Bryan, from both sides. Iran saying yesterday, do not approach. Simple as that, putting out on state media. We had J.D. Vance saying that they're not seeing any evidence of that things are slowing. That was a few hours ago. That's, as you suggest, that things have slowed. CENTCOM saying that they were staying present and vigilant. But if essentially a regime is saying this, that means it's shut, as you see it now, because I remember you being on last time, you talked about basically a defensive operations that could have been made, but that's a scenario where you really have to increase the risk and the number of basically US frigates willing to do the job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where we are right now is the U.S. is willing to guide ships out along the Omani coast and show them a mine-free path that they can use, but they're not committing to defend those ships. And because the U.S. doesn't want to break the ceasefire, break the agreement, the MOU that's just been let, they're not going to attack the Iranian coast if there do appear to be threats emerging. And that one of the things that they did during this Project Freedom effort was to use air cover to protect shipping and then attack Iranian threats that emerged along the coastline. Well, they're not doing any of that now because they're trying to avoid escalating. And so as a result, shipping companies are now essentially on their own. If they're going to make the passage, they're doing at risk, and the U.S. is not committed to defend them other than by just showing them the way that they can go without hitting any mines.
Has that surprised you? I mean, there are many analysts that will say Iran has won the war for the Strait for future control. And I ask this because the US enforced its own blockade, as you know, that clearly affects the Iranian economy and oil. But Iran didn't blink first. And has it shown that the US just hasn't been able to or decided not to take the risk of trying to catch whatever the Iranians throw at the shipping lanes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the U.S. has decided that they want to avoid escalating the conflict, getting embroiled back in the war. I think politically back here in the United States, the administration is trying to avoid being perceived as rejoining the war because it's been very unpopular here. And they're all trying to come up with a way to seek an off-ramp. And so any that retaliation or any active defense against Iranian threats could be perceived as breaking the agreement. The Iranians do then start to escalate on their side, attacking the Gulf allies, attacking Israel, and then attacking shipping that goes through the strait. And right now, the U.S. really isn't in a position to defend all of those targets simultaneously. So the Iranians could escalate and cause quite a bit of damage before the U.S. would be able to retaliate and maybe bring things to another resolution.
Are you getting any communication, you're hearing from any former colleagues, any serving personnel within the Navy, within the region right now, days on after this interim peace agreement has been made, as to their sense of what's been left as a result?
Well, the sense I get from people that are in the region, and I do engage with them pretty regularly, is we're sort of just watching each other across the strait. There's a very substantial naval presence still, so we've maintained 2 carrier strike groups, the amphibious ready group, tens of thousands of personnel in the region to monitor conditions as we try to go through this 60-day period of negotiation. And it creates it's a tense situation because they're all sort of waiting for an Iranian attack to come, and they're not really at liberty to make some kind of preemptive strike. So it does put them on edge a little bit because they're having to just sit there and wait to see what happens, as opposed to being proactive, which I think is what the U.S. military forces would prefer to do.
I'd seen some analysis, Bryan, and hopefully you can help with this, that there was estimated to be somewhere around 80 mines still in the strait,
right.
In the waters. Can that be determined? I mean, there's a scenario to work that out. I assume it's not the Iranian regime saying we've left 80 mines here and there.
Right.
The detection work going on.
Right. And so the estimate was a couple of dozen mines to start, and the U.S. has been diligently searching for the mines, using mostly the mine hunting robots that they developed over the last decade or so. They're pretty effective. They use them to go search for downed airplanes and find black boxes. So these robots are pretty effective at finding things in the water, but they're slow, and you have to recover them every time and download the data. So it takes you're talking a day with each cycle, right? So you're looking at a couple of weeks or 3 weeks before they'll have searched out the shipping lanes to find out where all the mines are. So I think the estimates are based on initial indications from those first surveys that were done during the war, and now they've got to do the detailed search to figure out exactly where the mines are, so they can then neutralize them, and then they have to clean up. So that could lead to a month or two by the time you actually clean up all the debris or whatever's left over from the mines after you neutralize them.
It's very interesting. So maybe a few dozen, possibly less than fewer than 80. Just before the ceasefire interim agreements agreed this week, the week leading up to it, there was this sudden escalation, including an Apache helicopter getting shot down off the Gulf of Oman. What's your understanding? I've heard various analysis of, was this positioning for control in the build-up to the memorandum of understanding being agreed? What was going on?
Definitely, I think so. I think the Iranians likely determined that they might be able to attack some. So these helicopters have been doing continuous patrols over the strait in an effort to both enforce the blockade as well as defend shipping that had been taking this Omani shipping route. And so the idea would be the helicopters would go out and they could shoot down drones. They're very effective at shooting down these Shahed drones. But the Iranians determined that they might be able to use the drones to attack the helicopters instead of attacking the ships because the helicopters' warning systems don't detect the kinds of sensors that the Shaheds have. They're used to detecting missiles like heat-seeking missiles, radar-guided missiles. So they determined that there might be a vulnerability they could exploit, and this was part of their effort to do enough of an escalation to remind the U.S. that things could get a lot worse. And bring the U.S. to the negotiating table. And I think they determined that the U.S. is looking for an off-ramp and that would help to push them in the direction of a resolution, or at least this MOU. And it seems to have worked to a degree.
And this is an area that you know well. And when we listen to just before the do not approach warning, so what, there's probably roughly, was it 48 hours or just under that ships had to get out of the Strait of Hormuz. What are you hearing about the movement? Because if there are, a few hundred ships I've heard, up to 600, possibly tankers still stranded, why haven't we been seeing them all leave in the past few days? Is it simply because the width, the narrowness of the strait?
Right. Right. So one challenge is the narrowness of the channel that's been verified to be clear of mines, right? So these ships are going to have to go out via that narrow lane next to the Omani coast, which means that you have to go out essentially in single file, if not maybe two abreast, but that's at most, which really limits the number that can go out, right? Because you're now going to basically go out single file line, and and you have to travel relatively slowly because you're close to the coast and you don't want to get grounded. So that slowed down the traffic quite a bit. The other thing is there's quite a few shipping companies that still have not decided to send their ships out because they're not willing to take the risk that the Iranians will honor their agreement, or that a mine won't drift into the lane, right? So they want to make sure they have surety that both Iran has agreed to and is standing down in accordance with the MOU, but also they want to make sure that someone surveyed the entire shipping lane to make sure that it's free of mines. So there's some more conservative shipping companies that have decided not to take advantage of the windows when the lane has been available, and that's why a lot of these ships are still inside the Persian Gulf.
One thing that is very interesting, as I talk to you, I'm minded of, is whether we're going to start to see US warships deployed elsewhere. Now, we're in a state of flux again because Iran is saying it's closed. There are talks ongoing, but I'm minded of these comments at the G7, reportedly picked up by Associated Press, quoting President Trump as saying this, quote, Iran will soon be back in the rear view mirror, that he wanted to concentrate more attention on Ukraine and elsewhere. What's your take?
Well, yes, I think the the administration is very eager to find an off-ramp, put this in the rearview mirror, as you said, and the Iranians are obviously taking advantage of that, and that was part of their escalation that they had before the end of the war, was to remind the U.S. that things would just get worse if the U.S. didn't come to the negotiating table with a pretty good compromise, which they did. I mean, the agreement, I think everybody can agree, is much more to Iran's favor than the United States. So they took advantage of the fact that they were looking for this off-ramp. And the U.S. is not eager to go back to war at all. And so the Iranians can take advantage of that. And so now you see them saying they're closing the strait because of the recent exchange of fire between Hezbollah and Israel. And they can do it again and again and again. And there's not much the U.S. can do because the Iranians know that the U.S. really doesn't want to get back into a cycle of retaliatory strikes that are going to be pretty unpopular back here in the U.S.
One thing that, just listening to you, Bryan, that few people were able to explain, apart from you very well, as an ex-submarine officer, that the role of US subs in this conflict and to the extent that they've been vital to the operations.
Right. They've been pretty limited. The U.S. Now the submarine force, yeah, as you remember, they did sink an Iranian ship out in open ocean that was making its way back from Sri Lanka, and they've been operating quite a bit out in the Arabian Sea. And I believe there were some submarine-launched cruise missiles that attacked Iran. But because the Persian Gulf is relatively shallow, it's not an area where submarines operate frequently. And I think the U.S. has transitioned in a lot of ways to using unmanned systems to do some of the surveillance missions that we would have previously used a submarine to do inside the Persian Gulf. So you see these drone boats, like the one that rescued the Apache pilots. Those have been operating in the Persian Gulf since the war started. And their job is to gather intelligence. So they're gathering electronic intelligence and visual intelligence and monitoring the Iranian coast. And those are types of things that you would have, in past decades, we would have used submarines to do because it's the only thing that can get close enough with a camera to go look at the coast in a way that you can't do from overhead. But now, so it's an interesting, the war has sort of accelerated this transition to thinking about using these unmanned systems for jobs that are beyond just the normal kind of surveillance that they do. It's now using them for very specific intelligence gathering missions.
Bryan, it's a fascinating insight, as always, with you. Thank you for your time today.